Welcome. Yes, my friends, this is the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast, and I am your host, Rob Recluse, and welcome to the podcast. This is going to be the gala. I think it's gala. It might be gala, but I'm going to say gala 20th podcast of the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast. That the time has flown by since I've done my first one, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. I hope I do 20 more or 40 more or 60 more if I can get a couple pots of coffee. You know, that I might be able to do that. But yeah, I'm just very pleased this punch I'm able to present all these great Edmonton music legends in their own way and artifacts of the Edmonton music scene and Edmonton history for all you fine people. I hope you enjoy that. So what are we going to do here today? I love, and I say this again, I say this for all of them, but I love this record. And I'm going to do a shout out right now before I even get into the record itself and say if anybody knows about this particular gentleman, how the record was made, all of that stuff. I want to hear it all. That's, you know, it pretty much is the bottom line on this one. So without further ado, this is an album that I picked up a couple of years ago. I've kind of kept it close to the vest since I picked it up. The name of the album is called Especially for You, and the artist, the gentleman, the band leader who does this is a gentleman by the name of Charles Benko, and his group, I guess, called A Night Out, or his group or his performance piece or whatever you want to call it. This album is great. This is, I love albums by artists that kind of let it all hang out and do what they do best as a musician when they go in and they get their one shot at recording, or maybe two shots, you know, if you're really lucky. But if you get your one shot at a recording, you just kind of do what you do best and kind of let the chips fall where they may. I love this album specifically for that reason. Charles Benko is an accordion player. He is a very good accordion player, and the band that he has with him are a very competent, very professional band. The thing that intrigues me about this is that, as with a lot of other people that I've spotlighted on the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast, I can find no record whatsoever of Charles anywhere on the net, and which was really intriguing to me. The people who played on his record and the studio where he produced the album and made the album, and people who were behind it, I guess monetarily, are familiar to me, but not Charles himself. So if you know anything about Charles and you know anything about this LP, lay it on me. It's my email is at rev@vintageedmonton.com. Please, I want to hear everything. If Charles is still around and he's listening to this podcast, hit me up, as the kids say, Charles, and let me know. I want to hear everything. So let's get this baby rolling. Number one, he does mostly standards on this. There's a few songs thrown in that maybe aren't as recognizable as the other ones, but Charles and the band does mostly standards. And I'm going to start things off with definitely a standard, one of the great songs of the last century, of the 20th century, done by the Glenn Miller Orchestra. So let's start it off with Charles Benko, A Night Out, and the album Especially for You, with a song done originally by the Glenn Miller Orchestra, a song called In the Mood. They get things rolling here on the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast. Welcome back to the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast. That was Charles Benko and his band called A Night Out with the Glenn Millard Standard, In the Mood. So I'm going to read the liner notes here, the nitty-gritty, as it were, of who played where and all that kind of stuff. It was recorded on August 31st, 1983, mixed down on September 1st, 1983. So this was a 2-day baby, hitting out the recording one day and mixing the next day. And it was recorded and mixed at Century Sound 81. Is it Century? No, it's Country Sound. Sorry about that. Country Sound 81 Productions in Edmonton, Alberta. The recording engineer was Daryl Acosta, and I hope I got that right. One of these days somebody's going to shoot me because I didn't get that name right. But yes, it is Daryl Acosta. Sorry about that, Daryl, if I didn't get it right. Anyway, the band members, Charles Benko, the leader, as it says on here, played accordion and organ accordion. Des O'Kell played drums. C.J. Mistel played banjo, tambourine, and maracas. And again, Charles Benko's name, it says here on the bottom of it, says he's playing bass. I don't know why he didn't put it on the top, but, whatever. Charles Benko playing bass. So without further ado, this is Caroline's Polka by Charles Benko and A Night Out here on the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast. Welcome back to the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast. That was Charles Benko with a Charles Benko original song called Caroline's Polka. So I'm going to read the excellent liner notes for this. You can get so much history and a kind of a glimpse of who an artist is by the liner notes, no matter who writes them. Sometimes the liner notes are written by the artist themselves, and this one is no different. So I'm just going to get right to it. It has no authorship, so I'm just going to lay it on the line for you here. In Western Canada, whether you were in Edmonton or Vancouver, you will find Canadians of 100 different ethnic backgrounds dancing to polkas, rumbas, waltzes, marimekos, sorry about that, foxtrots, and 100 other dances that were brought over from the old country. And now, here is a new twist of a music taste. Charles Benko, A Night Out. Charles Benko has done very well for himself. We at Country Sound 81 Recording Studio think that Charles Benko is number one in accordion styling. The group has just recorded their first 45 disc, which I have, by the way. Yes, I do have this. And now their first long play album has just been released. So roll up the carpet for a drink and a dance to the sound of Charles Benko, A Night Out. The main thing of a band is the leader. And that one thing that I can say about Charles Benko, and that is one thing that I can say about Charles Benko, sorry about that. Charles started his musical career at a very young age. His musical ability is credited to his late father, Charles Benko Sr. So there you go. You get a little bit of a synopsis of Charles as a man and as a musician and as a human being and all that. So, again, I love this album. It's so much fun to listen to. The next one I'm going to play for you, again, is another standard. I think Sergio Mendes did this, or Herb Alpert, one of the two, somebody from the 60s. But, again, it's an old standard that everybody has heard at one time or another. And, yes, I'm talking about Cherry Pink and Apple Blossom White. So, without further ado, my friends, this is Charles Benko and his band called A Night Out, with the classic standard Cherry Pink and Apple Blossom White here on the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast. Welcome back to the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast. That was Charles Benko and his band called A Night Out with the old classic standard Cherry Pink and Apple Blossom White. Now, the last one I'm going to play for you today is my favorite track off of this album. It's, again, a Charles Benko original. The name of the song is called Actors Crying, which is a very intriguing title for not only Charles, but just an intriguing title itself. It kind of goes, I don't know, a little against the grain of what you would expect Charles by this point to come from. He seems like a very peppy kind of guy, but this the title of this, again, very intriguing. And the song itself has got a little bit more panache, I guess would be the correct term, or the one I'm going to use anyway, than maybe the other songs off of the album. I would certainly say that this is tour de force for Charles and his band. So without further ado, this is Charles Benko and his band called A Night Out, with his tour de force, a Charles Benko original, a song called Actors Crying, here in the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast. Welcome back to the Vintage Edmonton Music Podcast. That was Charles Benko and his band called A Night Out, with the tour de force, the last song on the album and the last song on the podcast, a song called Actors Crying, a Charles Benko original, my favorite track off this LP. And I hope you enjoyed this as much as I have. And yes, I'm going to plead one more time. If anybody knows anything about Charles and anybody knows anything about the recording of this album, please email me once again at rev@vintageedmonton.com. And I want to hear everything. So that's it, folks. That's the end of the show. I wanted to wrap up a couple of things before I sign off today. Was it yesterday? Yeah, I guess, because this is going to be officially released tomorrow, the 24th of February. Yesterday, quote unquote, I was over at CJSR with Tom Murray and Craig Elliott for their show called 68 Comeback Special. And they graciously allowed me to come on for a little bit and be their resident expert on all things Cleveland or Northeastern Ohio and the band Pere Ubu. And I had so much fun doing that. I'm trying to prod them into letting me come back and do a little mini tribute to my hero, Peter Lautner, who was an original member of Pere Ubu and also the band that preceded Pere Ubu in Cleveland, Rocket from the Tomb. So I'm gonna passionately persuade them to come back on the show. They do a Peter Lautner tribute, so hopefully I can do that, and I will give you news if I'm actually successful at that endeavor. So yeah, I had a great time, guys. So thanks a lot for letting me come on the show and blab a little bit. And again, I would be remiss Oh, and one more thing that I have to do. It's going to be part of this. So yes, I would be remiss if I didn't say that. Yes, I am on iTunes. You can subscribe to me on iTunes. Yes, I am on TuneIn. You can subscribe to me or follow me on the TuneIn radio app. Yes, I am on Google Play Music. You can do the same. You can subscribe to me, or I guess you can subscribe to me and slag that, put the follow thing on me on Google Play Music. I'm not quite sure what you actually do on that one, but yeah, you can do something along those lines. And also on Podomatic, sorry about that, which is where I started out. You can also subscribe to me there. So I'm on a lot of different platforms. And one of the things I never seem to mention that I should, I actually got an email, another one. I actually got another email. Yes, I got an email saying essentially, why don't you mention News Obscure? And I need to do that. News Obscure is kind of a companion piece to the Vintage Edmonton music podcast and Vintage Edmonton itself. It is a blog that is a daily blog. I think I update it a couple times a day with literally obscure news from the past, little esoteric, very obscure. Maybe you've heard it, maybe you haven't heard it. Just little things that kind of caught my eye as I do Vintage Edmonton and wanted to put out there for you fine people as well. So yes, please go check out the blog News Obscure at newsobscure.com. And again, go to Vintage Edmonton, which is vintageedmonton.com if you want to check out Vintage Edmonton history. Go to the, like anything else. Yeah, I think I get everything there because you're listening to the podcast, so I don't need to mention that. But yeah, go check it out and let me know what you think. I guess I'm going to say goodbye. So until next time, I'll see you all later.